Welcome to episode 5 from Tales of the Supernatural and Unknown. Timothy gets a bit more than he planned for on his first camping trip. If you haven't already, do like and subscribe.
My name is Timothy, and I am 24 years old. Going camping has always been something I have been interested in doing. Being able to see the stars at night without the lights from the city drowning out the beauty of the night sky has been something that I have wanted to see from a young age. So, when a coworker named Jacob asked me if I wanted to join their group on a camping trip, I did not hesitate and jumped at the opportunity. He made it clear that I didn't have to worry about much, because most of the people going on the trip were experienced campers. He gave me a list of things I should bring and told me he would send an email with more information. Man, I was stoked. Finally, I would be able to experience being out in the woods and just enjoy nature. When I got home later that evening, I checked to see if Jacob sent the email. I was pleased to open my email and find it there. I read through it and watched a few of the videos that were linked in the email. It was mostly tips on what to do if you got lost, or if you found yourself in certain situations. I decided I would read over them a few times before the trip. The email also stated that we would be staying in a cabin near Mammoth Lakes, which was about 4 hours from Sacramento. Of course, I did some research on the area. From all the pictures I saw online, it looked as if I would get just what I was looking for. It was only Tuesday, so I had plenty of time to gather the items on the list Jacob sent. The following day at work during lunch, Jacob introduced me to the other people in the group. It was 5 of us total. There was Jacob, Lindsay, Mira, Antonio, and me. Jacob was 27 years old and a pretty fit guy. Of the group, I would say he was the fittest. Then there was Mira, who was 25 years old. Mira was also fit, and from what I heard did a lot of hiking on her own and with her family, who were very much the outdoorsy type. Lindsay loved camping, but never camped alone. In the group, she was the youngest at 23 years of age. Antonio was 24 years old and was also not a novice when it came to camping. Just last year, Jacob and he went whitewater rafting. They invited me to go on their next trip. Of course, I accepted. We all exchanged numbers and made plans on how we would get out to the cabin. Jacob said that he could pick us up if we wanted, because he would be getting an RV for the weekend. Antonio, Mira, and I took Jacob up on his offer. Lindsay decided to drive out to the cabin in her Jeep. Jacob said that once we were out at the cabin, we could use the ATVs they had there. He also said that they had jet skis as well. This sounded like it was going to be a blast. This would also be my first time riding a jet ski. We decided that we would head out early morning. That way we'd get there by noon at the latest. Next few days were spent getting more acquainted with the group. We were coworkers, but we hadn't really spoken that often. You know how people just sort of keep to themselves unless they have something that's of mutual interest. Well, that's us in a nutshell. Well, at least me, seeing as they have already done this on occasion. The night before, I won't say that I wasn't nervous. I was filled with energy as well as excitement. This made it hard for me to get some sleep. Eventually, I fell asleep and awoke the next morning to the blaring of my alarm clock. I had it set for 5 a.m. Last night I had already placed all my things at the door. I just gave it a once-over to make sure I had everything and waited for Jacob to arrive. Jacob arrived to pick me up at around 6:30 a.m. After gathering my things and placing them in the RV, I sat in the passenger seat. I was the first one to be picked up. Jacob said that Mira and Antonio were next to be picked up as they were on the way to the cabin. The ride to pick them up was uneventful. Jacob and I just listened to music and talked a bit about the area on our way picking up Antonio and Mira. Once we picked them up, we were on our way. I moved to the back to get a nap and Antonio sat up front with Jacob. I was shaken awake by Mira, who let me know that we had arrived at the cabin. I stretched a bit and took a look out the window. The view was amazing. I quickly jumped to my feet and made my way to the door, stepping out into the fresh air. The trees stretched high into the sky as the sun shined down from above. Everyone set to work getting their belongings and taking them inside the cabin. The cabin was very nice. It was mostly made of wood. It had a large porch area that extended almost completely around the whole house. With 3 rooms upstairs and 2 rooms downstairs, there was plenty of room for everyone. There was also a fireplace, not that we would need it, as well as a jacuzzi which was added a few months ago. As if that wasn't enough, there was a den, although Jacob said it wasn't used much. Jacob and Antonio ended up going on a food run due to the lack of food that was left in the cabin. That left me and Mira at the cabin to hold down the fort until they got back. I took some time to look around the immediate area of the cabin. It was truly a sight to behold. As I walked around to the front of the cabin, I could hear the engine of a vehicle. It couldn't be Jacob and Antonio back so soon, I thought to myself. As I stared down the road, I could see a Jeep approaching. As the Jeep got closer, I could see Lindsay with her arm out the window waving feverishly. I walked out to meet the vehicle as she pulled in, parking her Jeep on the side of the cabin.
Hey, where's the RV?
Jacob and Antonio went on a food run about 40 minutes ago, I shouted back. She laughed as I turned and headed towards the front door. Once inside, I sat on the couch in the living room. Lindsay, following close behind, did the same.
Man, that drive-in was kind of rough. There was an accident about halfway here. I would have been here sooner if it wasn't for that,
she stated as she sat on the other end of the couch. Lindsay was rather good-looking. Seeing her like this caused me to take an instant liking to her. I did my best not to stare at her. We talked for a bit before hearing a vehicle out front. Antonio and Jacob had just gotten back, and so me and Lindsay went out front to meet them. After getting the supplies inside, everyone set about getting their areas where they would be bedding down for the night claimed and organized. Lindsay chose to be upstairs along with Antonio and myself. That left Mira and Jacob on the bottom floor. With that settled, we all decided to head to the lake nearby for some fun in the sun. The lake could be seen from the cabin through the trees. It wasn't close, but it wasn't that far either. We hitched up the jet skis and headed to the lake. We only had 3 jet skis total, so we would have to take turns, although one of the jet skis was a 2-seater. We had a blast out on the lake. I never knew that these things were so fast. We all started heading back as the sun set. Once back at the cabin, we ate, played some music, and made plans for tomorrow. We decided that we would all head out on the ATVs at about 9 a.m. After that, I headed off to bed, but not before noticing that Antonio and Mira were flirting with each other. Everyone else just seemed to be doing their own thing. Morning came, carrying the aroma of a delicious meal on the air. As I made my way to the kitchen, I could see that Lindsay had already made breakfast for everyone. I thanked her and helped myself to some pancakes, eggs, and bacon. Slowly, everyone else seemed to be called by the aroma to the kitchen. Laughs were shared with humorous banter of yesterday's activities. Then it was time to get on the road. If I had known what was to come, I would have demanded we all leave. Hindsight is always 20/20, but none of us had a clue what was to come. So, we set out filled with excitement out the front door. Jacob led the way with all of us on our own ATVs, heading down trails whizzing through the forest, and Antonio bringing up the rear. We were all single file as we followed close behind Jacob. Gradually, we picked up speed, and before too long we were like a train on tracks going through the forest. Our laughs and the revving engines of the ATVs echoed through the forest as we sped along the trail. After about 30 minutes of riding, we came upon a clearing. It was a sight to behold. We all got off our ATVs to take in the views and have lunch. Having brought my cell phone along, I took a few pictures, but it seems I wasn't the only one with this idea. Seeing as tomorrow was a holiday, we all set to making plans on what we would do. With so many options and it getting late, we decided to discuss it further after we got back to the cabin. So, everyone geared up and we headed back with Jacob leading the way once again. About 15 minutes into our ride back, Antonio came speeding up from the rear, frantically looking behind him. As he sped past me, he had this look on his face of fear. He reached the front with Jacob, and they seemed to be discussing something. Without slowing down, Jacob stood up on his ATV and waved his hand forward as if motioning for us to come towards him. It was with that motion that our pace quickened. We began to pick up speed as we followed Jacob and Antonio. With me now in the rear of the formation and the sun beginning to set, that's when I noticed it. Over the noise of the ATVs, I could hear what sounded like the forest coming to life, and that noise seemed to not be all around us but trailing behind us. It was like we were being chased. Could this be why Antonio went up to the front with Jacob? Did he see something? Up ahead of me was Mira, and then Lindsay was ahead of her. I sped up, joining Mira riding side by side. I was not okay with being the last in line after hearing what I was hearing. The next thing I heard was this roar come from behind us. I am sure we all heard it because we all looked back, but none of us stopped. Lindsay yelled, "There's more than one!" as she pointed to our right. This one was also just inside the tree line, but I was able to make out more features. It moved effortlessly through the trees, almost appearing to be floating along the ground as it paralleled us. It had long arms with pointy claws that looked as if they could tear us to shreds if needed. What were these creatures and why were they after us? Maybe we will be their next meal. As thought after thought raced through my mind, I could see the cabin in the distance. We were almost there. As we raced towards the clearing just leading up to the cabin, there was a blur, and Antonio went flying off the ATV onto the ground. It was one of the creatures that came from the tree line that knocked Antonio from his ATV. The creature stood a few feet from Antonio. It looked to be about 8 feet tall, and its body was a blend of tree branches and muscles. Before it could attack Antonio, Jacob crashed his ATV into the creature, leaping from the ATV before the impact. He tumbled to the ground, but quickly got to his feet and ran over to where Antonio had fallen. Antonio was already on his feet by the time Jacob got to him. The two just took off, sprinting towards the cabin. The rest of us jumped from our ATVs as we got close to the cabin. As we ran towards the stairs out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement and instinctively pushed Lindsay, who was in front of me. There was a sharp pain along my shoulder and back as we all stumbled onto the porch, bursting through the front door and slamming it shut behind us. Jacob headed towards the back of the house. As the rest of us talked frantically among ourselves, Lindsay's voice cut through the chatter.
"Timothy, oh my God, there is a long scratch on your back."
Everyone stopped and began to look at my back. It must have happened when I pushed Lindsay out of the way. I didn't feel any pain, or that could be because we are all hyped up on adrenaline at the moment. As Mira and Antonio looked at the wound and had me remove my shirt, Lindsay left but returned with a med kit. Lindsay said that there were 3 long scratches on my back, but they weren't that deep. After she was done wrapping it up, she looked me in the face and said,
"Thank you. That would have been me if you hadn't pushed me out of the way."
I just nodded and put my shirt back on. Jacob returned from wherever he went.
Listen, I don't know what the hell those things are, but I don't have any plans to get eaten by tree creatures. Do any of you know how to shoot?
I had my CCW, so I let him know that I did. Mira was the only other person who had her CCW as well. He pointed to the table a few feet away from us, and there, lying on the table, was an assortment of firearms and weapons. I think we need to use weapons that are fire-based. Those things out there look like trees, and that means wood. The best thing for that is fire.
We have some dragon's breath rounds for a shotgun. My dad bought them, but he says they are illegal here, so he never used them.
I asked if he had ever fired a shotgun, and he responded no, and that if I wanted, I could use it. Lindsay said she would make Molotov cocktails while Antonio grabbed a handgun and an axe. Mira said she would use the cocktails, and she also grabbed a handgun from the table. I went over to the window next to the front door and looked out. In the trees were 4 sets of red eyes fixed on the cabin. Jacob said that there were 3 more at the rear of the cabin.
I think we should barricade ourselves inside. There is no way we can get past them if we go outside. They are just too fast.
We all agreed and got to work securing the up and down stairs. When we were done, everyone met back downstairs. It would be a long time until morning came. We would have to last until then. Suddenly there was a loud bang at the front door. It scared the hell out of all of us. We just stood there, frozen in place. Our plan was to just stay where we were. We had set up a barricade around our position in the living room. We flipped over the sectional, the love seat, the tables, and 2 desks. This made a circle barricade around us. We would fight from this position, because going close to the windows or standing near the door was too dangerous. As we listened, you could hear the creatures walking on the porch and the roof. There was also this clicking sound that the more I heard it, the more it felt like they were talking to each other. We stayed like this most of the night, while hearing periodic growls and bangs against the door. There were a few times I thought for sure they would get through, but they never did. There was about an hour left then, this whole thing would be over. I don't know if they planned it this way or what, But things did not end as we wanted. There was another bang on the door, and as we all stood at the ready facing the door, I heard that clicking noise again, but this time it was close and coming from behind us. One of the smaller tree creatures had made its way down the chimney as we were facing the door. Even though it was smaller, it still stood at 6 feet tall. Antonio was the closest to the chimney. Before any of us could react, it grabbed him and bit him on the neck. Blood squirted out from between the creature's teeth. Antonio didn't even get to scream. His body just went limp as the creature tossed his body to the ground. I can remember thinking that we are all gonna die now, and no one will ever know what happened to us. I raised my shotgun to fire a shot, but before I could get a shot off, the creature lunged at us, managing to thrust its claws into Jacob's stomach, knocking all of us back. The impact knocked me over the barricade and the shotgun from my grip. Mira was able to get off a few shots, but it didn't seem to have any effect on the creature. It only looked at her and growled as blood and saliva dripped from its mouth. Lindsay swung the axe, hitting it in the back, to only be backhanded, which knocked her into Mira and sent them both over the barricade. It then turned its gaze back toward Jacob, who now lay on the ground, bleeding from his stomach. It was going to finish him off. I had to do something, so I did the only thing I could. I screamed at the top of my lungs.
"Hey, you motherfucker, come get me, come get me!"
My yelling seemed to startle it. I looked around and saw the shotgun lying on the floor to my right. This was our only chance, I thought to myself. If this doesn't work, then we are done for. I jumped towards the shotgun just as the creature jumped towards me. I quickly chambered around and fired. The sound I heard next I will never forget. The creature let out the most horrific scream I have ever heard. As the shot propelled it backwards, it burst into flames and immediately crashed through the front door barricades and all. 2 other creatures tried to enter through the opening the creature had made, but they got a taste of the dragon's breath, and they took off running into the night. Not hesitating, I turned towards the fireplace and picked up one of the Molotov cocktails and tossed it into the fireplace. I fired a round into the fireplace, causing it to burst into flames. That should keep any more from coming down the chimney. I looked around, accessing the damage. Antonio was dead, Jacob was seriously wounded, Lindsay was knocked unconscious, and I had been slashed on my back. Mira was the only one that hadn't gotten hurt, but who knows what the ordeal would do to her mentally. I looked back to the front door and approached it cautiously. As I stood in the doorway, I saw one of the creatures perched in the tree, just staring down at me with those red eyes. We locked eyes, the creature and I, and as the sun rose, it disappeared into the trees. Mira had already covered Antonio's body. Lindsay was up and tending to Jacob's wound. She said he would be okay, but we had to get him to the hospital soon. We didn't have a clue what we would tell anyone, but one thing is for sure, it wouldn't be the truth.
Those tree spirits can be pretty nasty when disturbed. Just another reason to be leery of the forest at night. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And should you find yourself lost during your travels, let the light be your guide.